And I just remember I was on the train and I was very overwhelmed by the fact that I had to be there at like 6:30 a.m. and I was going to work all day. It was a pretty intense job, but I can handle it, you know. Just remember one day I was on the train and all of a sudden I just got scared. That was the first thing that happened. I never felt that way before. I didn't believe in myself. I started to question whether or not I was doing the right thing.
Was it an event? Did something get in
your
way?
I didn't know at the time. It just came out of nowhere. But I just remember I was on a train and I got this. I didn't know what anxiety was or anything like that because I was Superman, you know. But all of a sudden I just felt this just frightening feeling of just not believing in myself, not being certain of what I wanted to do. And I just remember I was frightened to death to go into work that day. And that was not like me. I tried my best to kind of like pretend it wasn't happening, but I couldn't. And it was so bad that I had to call in and lie, make up a reason why I couldn't come into work. And I went home, which was a bad idea because then it really, really sunk in. And what's interesting about that moment is that started a 3-month process of me not being able to even leave my house.
This is gonna hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast.
Reality is only real if you believe it to be true. The looking glass can become skewed over time and distort the image that stands in front of your eyes. You believe what you see, but what you see has been altered. When a conscious decision is made to check your vision, the blur comes into focus and a new world opens up. With new eyes, your soul is rejuvenated, and the path in front of you becomes clear. In an instant, those dark shadows become beams of light. Our lives become transformed due to a moment of clarity. A simple adjustment in how we perceive the world is the moment when everything changes. We open our eyes as a newborn child looking towards all the potential possibilities. I'm Kevin Donaldson, always here with Mike Falaise, and welcome to the Suffering Podcast. If you're a fan of overcoming adversity and overcoming suffering, then we're for you, because that's the stories that we like here and that's the stories that we highlight. So do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, please comment, ring the bell so you can get notified of all of our new content, and now you can join. And of course, follow us on all social media so you can find out what we're up to. On this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we welcome a relatively new friend, and that's Dr. J.C. Doornick, a.k.a. The Dragon, and we're going to get into why everybody calls you The Dragon, because that's how I was introduced to you the first time. But thank you so much for coming in.
It's an honor and privilege to be here, and it's always nice to hear somebody for the first time call you a friend. And I know you probably mean it.
I do. I don't use that F word very lightly. And tonight we're going to be talking about the suffering of transformations, because I really like how you sort of turned your life on its ear. But we're going to get into why that happened. Before we do, let's give a big shout out to our marquee sponsor. That's Toyota of Hackensack. We don't trust anybody as police officers or podcasters, and that's why we do trust Toyota Hackensack. So go to toyotahackensack.com and let them find you a car. So JC, each week we take a question from our audience. This question comes from Seer Seeker, and it says, what is something that you added to your life that you always wanted, but when you got it, you found out that it just didn't make you happy?
You know, it's funny because what I'm going to say is probably what everybody is after. And, it's like you don't know what you got until it's gone, but you also don't know what you got until you get it. And I would say the answer to that would be success. And the reason why I say that, and we were kind of alluding to that, the first dance that I had with success, and what I mean by that is by, making a nice amount of money that I always thought equated to success. It came at the expense of trading time for it. I was a workaholic. Some people are alcoholics. I was a workaholic. I was working 80, 90 hours a week to acquire that goal, that holy grail. So if I could take something back, it would be the time with my kids. That's one thing I could never have is during that workaholic time.
And that's something they're not making any more of.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
So it's the the funny thing is everybody wants to be successful, but very few people know what success is.
That's right. Nobody taught me what success was. I learned by watching people.
I heard this great definition of success. It's the exceeding of expectations. So if you're in a relationship and you start out that relationship on fire, you're giving her a dozen roses every week. Well, how are you going to maintain that? That's a bar you're setting for yourself that is just unattainable in the long term. But by definition, the definition of failure is falling below expectations. So I heard this quote. There was a movie with Bette Midler and James Caan called For the Boys. All right.
Okay.
And it was kind of like a knockoff of a Lucy and Desi type of thing. They started out in the USO, and they had this chemistry together, and they did a sitcom and stuff. And all these tragedies happened throughout their life. And at the end of their life, Bette Midler turns to James Caan and she goes, "There's a cost to everything. There's a price for everything. This was the price that we paid in order to be successful," or their idea of what success is. She lost her son in Vietnam, and she lost her husband in World War II. And all these tragedies happened throughout their life, but she was ultra successful. And on paper, she looked great. So I like your answer a lot because there's a cost to everything. There's nothing given for free.
Yeah.
So that movie, if you haven't seen that movie, watch that movie.
I'm a big James Caan fan.
So am I.
Is he still alive?
No, he passed, I want to say probably 2 or 3 years
That's
ago.
a shame.
Yeah, his son's still alive. Looks just like him.
Oh, wow.
So my answer to that is on the wavelength of yours. It's money. By the end of my police career, I was making a pretty good salary. And I was making 3 times plus what I started out as. But the funny thing is I didn't live all that differently. Because you're working so hard to accumulate all this money, but all you're doing is accumulating responsibilities. You make more money, so you buy a house, you have some children, you have all these, and you acquire all these things and all these accumulations that end up owning you. So money, when they say money is the root of all evil, they're not far from the truth on that. You need money to live, and with money, it does take a lot of the pressure off. I will say that. But just enough. When you have more than you need, that's when stuff starts going wrong. That's when you start living above your means, because it could all end tomorrow, right?
Yeah. And I always like to say that money's not the root of all evil. It's the love of money. And if money was such a bad thing, they wouldn't ask for it in church. But you'll never have enough money. It's something I try to teach my kids. The moment you become this proverbial millionaire, like within a minute, you'll be pondering the idea of 2 million. But once again, I always wonder if I went back and talked to the guy that went after money like I did and put my kids second to work, I don't think he would be open to listening to this message, because he would have said, "You guys don't know what you're talking about." So I also understand why I did that, and it also equated to some valuable lessons in life that have brought me to where I'm at.
We just had this discussion in one of our pre-production meetings today. It's the cost of doing business. Anything above keeping the lights on is a slippery slope. It really is a slippery slope, because if you're doing, especially this better than anybody, if you're doing podcasting for the money, boy, are you going to be seriously disappointed. There is money involved in it. However, it's not what you think it is. It's a mission. So there's 3 reasons you start a podcast: mission, message, and money. If you're doing it for the money, God, good luck. But if you realign yourself with that mission and message, that's when the fulfillment comes in there. And that's something that's way more valuable to me than money.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Seer Seeker, thank you so much for sending that question in. Keep sending in your questions, and we will try to get them on the air. And while you're at it, go see Gus at Cubita Cafe. That's 234 Franklin Avenue. Classically trained chef, probably some of the best food you're ever going to eat in your life. He cooks very healthy. He cooks to my dietary needs. And as Gus always says, he's not in the food business. He's in the people business. So go over and see Gus at Cubita Cafe, 234 Franklin Avenue, and tell him the Suffering Podcast sent you. So, JC, you traveled from Connecticut all this way to come down humbly and sit in this studio and have this discussion with me. We got a chance to talk on your show, Make Sense, not that long ago. And I really did enjoy, because there was a lot to unpack between us. There's more similarities to us.
It's a 2-hour episode.
Yeah, there's way more similarities between us.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was a nice, comfortable conversation. You're an incredibly bright and brilliant man.
Thanks.
And it was a good time because I usually don't like doing those Zoom things.
Yeah.
And that's how you know you're a friend, because I do the Zoom things for my friends. So there you go.
There you go. Validation once again.
So I know enough about you. We met at Creative Con in 2004 in February. I know enough about you from our mutual friend, Julie Loken. But I want you to tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up?
So it's interesting because I'm one of these guys that, probably was looked at as somebody that had it made. I wrote another book that's coming out in the future called We Had It Made. But I grew up in Westchester. I mean, I spent the first couple of years of my life in France. My father is from France, and my dad was an Olympic skier. So I have an interesting life there.
That's right. Your name's Jean-Claude.
Jean-Claude, after Jean-Claude Keely. And my grandfather, I come from a very interesting family, which is how I learned later on I have the entertainment gene in me. My grandfather was pretty much the guy that invented cabaret, and his best friends were like Pablo Picasso and Charlie Chaplin. And,
Whoa. Hang on a second.
Yeah, we could get sidetracked with that. But I grew up in Rye, New York. I mean, it's Westchester. It's like, one of the wealthiest areas, and I went to Rye High School where
Isn't that where Howard Stern used to live?
I don't know. I don't think Howard Stern lived there. I think Howard Stern's from Long Island. Actually.
Oh, no. So the story, no. I'm going to tell you how I ride New York. So somebody years ago, when Howard Stern was Howard Stern, somebody was going to publish pictures of his daughter, and he didn't want it. And he talked to the guy on the phone, and he goes, so-and-so, the guy's name, you live in Rye, New York. I will have 10,000 people on your front lawn if you publish those pictures.
I probably would have been one of them.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I was a big Howard Stern fan. But, it's just a place where, it's interesting because I know your story, but, on the surface, kids are walking around with $20 bills in their hands, and, everybody's just got everything that they want. But what you don't see is the hidden secret that, like, alcoholics are just running rampant everywhere, and parents don't have time for their kids and things like that. So I had it made in one sense, but in another sense, I had some pretty crazy things happening to me, at the same time, and I don't know if you want to get into that now, but
Of course, because the people who grow up in what you would be considered as affluent, and that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a guy who grew up in one of the wealthier neighborhoods in L.A., and they have their own. It's different. They have their own types of suffering, and you don't realize it. You see
behind the scenes.
You see, their parents have a lot of money, but like you said in the beginning, maybe their father, didn't come to their baseball games or football games, and that's something that they really wanted. It seems so. It's a different type of thing. It's being there. It's, I'm at the point in my life where I'd rather have no money and see my kids than have all the money in the world and never be able to see them. So, and that's where drugs are rampant because you have the money for the drugs.
Yeah, I had access to anything I wanted, and also, things have changed a little bit. But back in those days, like at the age of 14, I could come home anytime I wanted. But to highlight something you just said about fathers, for me, and I'm not going to suck my thumb because I know your father's story, but my father's a great guy, but he was just never home. My dad was always traveling. It was very normal for me to, at a very young age, to not know where my dad was, because he was always traveling. And, I looked up to him. He's a very smart guy, spoke all these languages, good dresser, but he was never home, like for 6 weeks at a time, So as a kid, I just assumed that that's just the way it was, It wasn't until later in life that I realized that I learned how to play baseball and all these things from my friends' dads, you know. Anyway, but I didn't know that stuff when I was a kid. But what's interesting about my story is that something happened when I was 11 years old that I actually didn't know happened until what I call the dark ages sunk in. I'm 53 years old, so the dark ages, sunk in around in my 30s. Right. And I just, what you got to know about me, people that know me for a long time, I was a very, very confident, borderline cocky guy. I'm a very, very humbled guy now, but just know inside there's an asshole in this guy, and he doesn't come out anymore. but he used to be out all the time. I was always driven to be successful, more importantly, the best. So, I was on this fast track to become a chiropractor, and not only just a chiropractor, but I was going to work in the biggest office in Manhattan. And everybody that knew me probably hated the fact that they knew I was going to be extremely successful, because I was confident. I had everything, all the tools, and I couldn't fail. I had all the tools that I wish my kids had to succeed. The only problem with being a guy like that is if all of a sudden you catch a fear where you don't feel confidence, it could be the most frightening event ever. I remember a mentor one time told me, be careful, you're going to hit a wall one day. And I said, not me, I'm not going to hit a wall. So it was in my early 30s, and I was at a chiropractic school, and I was on my way to this amazing opportunity job in Manhattan. I was working for one of the biggest doctors, probably going to take his practice over, and everybody, there it is, he's going to be successful. And I just remember I was on the train, and I was very overwhelmed by the fact that I had to be there at like 6:30 a.m. and I was going to work all day. It was a pretty intense job, but I can handle it, Just remember one day I was on the train, and all of a sudden I just got scared. That was the first thing that happened. I never felt that way before. I didn't believe in myself. I started to question whether or not I was doing the right thing.
Was it an event? Did something get in your way?
I didn't know at the time. It just came out of nowhere. But I just remember I was on a train, and I got this. I didn't know what anxiety was or anything like that, because I was Superman, But all of a sudden, I just felt this just frightening feeling of just not believing in myself, not being certain of what I wanted to do. And I just remember I was frightened to death to go into work that day. And that was not like me. I tried my best to kind of like pretend it wasn't happening, but I couldn't. And it was so bad that I had to call in and lie, make up a reason why I couldn't come into work. And I went home, which was a bad idea, because then it really, really sunk in. And what's interesting about that moment is that started a 3-month process of me not being able to even leave my house.
So I say this with, there's the great trainer Teddy Atlas, who trained Mike Tyson. He said a comment to me that resonated with me. I heard this years ago, where he said, if you ask me what Mike Tyson's record is, it's probably 0-5. And the reason he said that, because Mike Tyson was so talented, so good, he didn't have to work that hard, because it sounds like you have a natural ability for confidence, right?
Right.
So he didn't have to work that hard. And the minute he was met with an obstacle, he folded like a lawn chair. Now, I take this in when I coach my kids. I'll see a kid on the field, and he'll have all the talent in the world. And I said, that kid there who doesn't have to work to just be better than everybody, one of 3 things is going to happen to them. They're going to eventually be met with an obstacle, whatever that obstacle is, and they're either going to quit, they're going to cheat, or they're going to rise above it. The ones who rise above it athletically, they're the ones who make it to the next level. The ones that quit and cheat, they're pretty much done after high school. And I watch that because they're so good, they never have to work for anything, and eventually that obstacle is going to happen, and that sounds like what happened to you.
I know what you're saying, but I knew that, and I knew to tell myself that at the time, but this was different. Something else was going on, almost like I had some sort of a mental challenge or something like that. I couldn't figure it out. Because I knew that strong people push through it and stuff like that. But there was something else going on that was more powerful than me. And by the way, this is kind of a precursor of the whole concept of the dragons, because the way I explain that story is that I started to feel like dragons were swooping over my head, like waiting for me like vultures to become weak so that they could kill me. So that was the first concept of the dragon. So anyway, 3 months go by, and I'm progressively getting more, because I was buying into it. You said that before. I was buying into it further and further. And for somebody that's listening to this podcast, you might resonate with this idea of just like, at one moment, everything's fine. And then in the other moment, you can't explain what happened. And you start looking like, what was the event? What happened? What triggered this? I couldn't figure any of that out. All I could tell you is that the only thing that made sense to me was to kill myself.
Wow.
I was in a place where I was at the extreme opposite of cocky and confident, and I was completely unconfident, scared, and I could not for the life of me get out of that hole.
Was it the fall from not the quintessential fall from grace? You were in such a level.
I mean, it got worse and worse as I became more of a sissy, and I got weaker and weaker and weaker. But I still could not tell you. I had the greatest job. I was going to get married. Everything was going perfect. So I didn't know. So by the grace of God, things fall in. I know that you recently lost a good friend, and we were talking about how, you either have help or you didn't. My mom was right by my side. My mom's a bit of a kook, but she did this right. And my mom talked me in because all I wanted to do is check out. I just said that would be that was actually a desirable thing. I didn't want to feel like that anymore. I was so frightened and embarrassed of how I felt. So my mom takes me to see a therapist, which is the last thing I ever want to do. Because when you're a cocky and confident guy, even if you're in the darkness, you still think therapy is a bunch of shit, right? So, but I was like, I'll try anything. I was so frightened. So here's what's interesting about this therapist is I went to the therapist. I don't even remember her name, but I only saw her once. And this is after 3 months. I hadn't shaved. I'm not showering. I'm a mess. I'm engaged to be married, and I can't even face her. Don't see my friends. Everybody's like, what the hell happened to him? I had to quit my job, everything, which is piling it on, getting it worse and worse and worse. So I go to see this therapist, and I sit down in front of her, and this is coming out in my new book. And, I'm sitting across from this person that I never wanted to see in my life. Somebody that's asking me, why do you want to kill yourself? I was embarrassed about that. So we get into this conversation. And what's fascinating about what I'm about to share is how I went from super confident and cocky to extreme darkness and wanting to die. And then I came back the same way. And I want people to understand that that's possible. That's possible. You shouldn't expect it. But it's possible that your brain could latch onto an idea that take you way down or right back up. It's possible. So this woman started asking me questions. She said, why do you want to kill yourself? And I said, I don't know. It's the only solution. And I was kind of avoiding that. So she started to peck at like, well, what happened? What day was it? So I'm counting 3 days ago, sometime in July. I was on my way to work and all that stuff. And she's like, all right. And she says, well, is there anything relevant about July? And I said, well, it's my birthday. And she goes, well, that's a good time. And I go, no, I don't like to talk about my birthday. I hate my birthday. I don't like when people give me gifts or anything. I'm like ducking my birthday. And I didn't really understand this until I woke up later. And she says, why? Why do you like? I said, I don't want to talk about my birthday. I don't like it. I like other people's birthdays, not mine. And then she's like, all right. So then she says to me, she goes, well, what about your parents? Because I met your mother. What about your dad? And I said to her, oh, my parents are divorced. That's a mess. I don't want to talk about that. And then she looks at me and she says, when did they get divorced? And I call this the snap. When she asked me that question, and this is what I want people to understand. This is why I've become an expert at asking questions. When she asked me that question, in that instant, I made the connection that when I was 11 years old, on my birthday, and it didn't come out until now, 11 years old on my birthday, I walked in on my birthday, and think an 11-year-old, I think we were going to a bowling alley or something like that, and I walked in, and my mom was in her underwear at the base of the stairs, didn't know this happened until this moment, crying. And I said, what's wrong? And I remember, I never forget, she looked at me and she's crying. She says, your father's leaving us. Now, I don't know what that means because my dad's always leaving us, but I knew that she was upset. And I just remember with my tongue licking the bottom of my lip because that's what I would do when I was nervous. And I said, all right. So I left, right? And I said, can I go play with my friends? And I had to go tell my friends my birthday got bumped. So something that I did that day, tuck that under the carpet, And it didn't resurface until the day I was on that train, which was my birthday, going into the city at like 33 years old. And it knocked me on my ass.